Hi, everybody. Thanks for logging in. Good to see, well, not really see, but good to have you all here with us today. We'll, of course, give it a few more minutes. We know that you've just wrapped up a super busy day. It is what, 3:13. So we'll start right at 3:15 or shortly after. We can see the attendee numbers are climbing up. So good job there. And yeah, just take a couple minutes if you need to take care of your basic needs before we get started, run to the restroom, get a drink, whatever. We will be starting here in just a few minutes, and we will start with an opening activity. And so if you see any of your colleagues hanging around the corner or anyone that needs to join you, just tell them we're getting ready here in just a minute or two. If you're joining, welcome, welcome. If you hadn't yet filled out that quick little form that was in the email I sent this week and this morning, we could still take your feedback. So that's kind of a pre-assessment just to help us gauge if we're having an impact on what we're doing. And so that's the intent of that. We really would love you. It's like simple, just a few questions. If you hadn't filled that out yet, feel free. Last time I looked, it's like 600 and some responses. So it makes me excited. Doesn't take much, I guess, but we were really happy to see that. We know some of you are joining here. We're seeing the attendee numbers climb up, and we want to honor everyone's time while giving just a short grace period to take a breath and log on to this PD. Knowing that everyone's joining at different times, you'll hear me say welcome several times. So welcome if you hadn't heard me say that before. We'll get started here shortly, probably within the next minute, to kind of kick off our learning together officially this afternoon. Again, if you hadn't yet filled out that pre-assessment, that feedback form that I sent this morning, it's an email from Laura Daly. Please check that out, and it'll only take a couple minutes. We'd love to get your feedback so we can gauge how well we are doing with our PD offerings. And encourage anyone else that's kind of walking through the hallways there to get settled. We know it takes a lot to transition from the end of your work day into a PD mode on a webinar format here. And we also want to honor your time. So thanks for showing up. We are going to start, and we know that probably several more people will be joining within the next few minutes. So then just welcome them into your space if they're going to be sitting here near you or around you. We are going to embark this afternoon for about an hour on an all-district professional development, focusing on culturally responsive classroom practices that promote social, emotional, behavioral health for all, meaning all students and even all staff. So let's start with an opening, welcoming, inclusive activity. And this will just bring into the space. You've thought about a million things today, no doubt. So let's just take a second to use a really simple visual and kind of just check in with you. Where are you right now? What's your emotional weather? Use a visual and just turn to, you're probably sitting with a colleague, maybe a group of colleagues, or maybe even as a larger staff, whoever you're sitting near-ish to, if you could just share with them, what's your emotional weather right now? Maybe it changed a couple times throughout the course of the day. So take a minute or so to do that. I'll kind of pause a little bit, but also kind of keep talking. So just go ahead and share. If you hear me talking, I'm just kind of repeating the directions here as people are hopping in. We're starting with a welcoming and inclusive activity. This is a really super quick one. We're pointing out these signature SEL practices. This is one of them. You don't have to use this particular emotional weather map every time, but it just gives an opening, gives a structure for conversation. If you think about using it with students too, there's some equity of voice, maybe gives a sense of belonging, gives students a chance to show up authentically how they're feeling at that moment, that day. And so we will intentionally be using some strategies that go along with those SEL practices. And we'll point those out as we go along today. So thanks again for joining us. We know some of you just hopped on. You heard me say this before, so we'll just kind of proceed now with an overall welcome, and we'll continue on. Thank you for participating in that inclusive welcoming. Let's go ahead and get started for the day then. So this is the first of an ongoing series of professional development. We're so happy, our team here, which we'll introduce in a minute, to have worked with and really follow the path that's been carved by Laura Gray and her equity team to begin some all-district PD sessions related to equitable educational experiences for all of our students. And that started over the course of last year. And Laura always highlighted the importance of social emotional learning and embedded that within the important topics of cultural proficiency, restorative practices, culturally responsive teaching, and even, thinking about the collectivist mindset. And so that intentional connection to social emotional behavioral health is then kind of where we're building the bridge and going a little bit deeper, starting today and over a series of a few more PDs for the rest of the year, that are about the importance of establishing relationships, getting into the why, the how, and an action step, and then connecting that to evidence-based classroom practices that have a high impact on continuing to build relationships and eventually get us to some, overall high student academic achievement. So that's a quick preview of what we're going to be doing over the course of a little bit of time, as well as we'll dig into what we're going to do today. So some quick introductions. Hi, everybody. In case you weren't here when we first started, welcome. We're happy to have you here. I'm Laura Daly, Director of Learning Supports. And then we also have our SEBH team here with us today. There's more people in our Learning Supports department. It's just that our team today that's focusing on this is Corrine Frank. She's with us right here. Allison Freitag, Lindsay Schleckebeer, and Christy Miller. So reach out to any of us at any time. We'll give you our emails. Well, obviously you have mine, but we're here to help. So what can you expect over the next 5 sessions? We kind of talked about today being focused on relationships and culturally responsive teaching classroom practices. We're going to build upon that over a series of PD. So you can see those topics in January, February, and April, and May. And they are all related to those classroom practices. So you may, as you read those topics, you may say like, oh yeah, that all makes sense. What we will do is dive into those a little bit more specifically and show, kind of do what we're doing today with relationships, a little bit of the why, but more on the how, so that then you can walk away with some strategies, some tips, work as a building, as well as maybe with a group of teachers or just yourself on what your action steps will be for some implementation. We also are going to focus on how these 6 classroom practices, along with being culturally responsive, also support overall well-being for educators by focusing on a set of common evidence-based practices that have been proven to have high leverage results to promote equity and high learning for outcomes for students. It kind of helps us create some common language, helps us create some common consistency and practical application across the district. So, I know we're all about consistency and trying to work smarter and not harder. And so that's part of what we are working on to achieve today. We really appreciate you filling out that pre-assessment form. I mentioned it as we were kind of hopping on today. If you hadn't done it yet, I mean, you could kind of do it while you're listening here, but that will help us, drive the content of the instruction moving forward. We also know that there are several staff members here today that aren't teachers. And so even though we're saying it's classroom practices, know that these relationship building practices can be applied to a variety of educational settings. And so if your position is not direct teaching in the classroom, just keep that in mind and think about how you can use a takeaway to implement these practices and think about that relationship building component within the role and the work that you do with students. And you'll even note how that helps you build relationships with your colleagues, perhaps as well. So we know that we are always wanting to try what works. And one of the things that we have been over time thinking about is just the importance of that foundational building, importance of building relationships. And we think of it as a little bit of getting back to the basics. And you'll hear a theme of that throughout what we're talking about today. And when we're talking about, students benefiting from these effective classroom practices, when we're talking about strong management, we're not talking about what's being done to students. It's what you're doing with students and that safe, physically and emotionally safe learning environment that you're setting up, and how that then can have a likelihood of creating a positive impact in a positive climate within your school. And I already referenced just minimizing the number of strategies might impact your wellness as well. And instead of trying to do it all, just being able to focus on ones that have a big impact. A quick little thought that I have about the basics is that when I was going through school, elementary, junior high, and high school, which was a long time ago, I will admit, there was kind of this reference to the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic, which, it's not really how you spell it, which I didn't think about it at the time. But of course, we want to get to that academic rigor and achievement. What we have learned over time in education is that importance of the foundation of social emotional behavioral health and relationship building in order to get there. So I kind of have rephrased that in my mind to the 3 R's being rituals, routines, and relationships, by having predictable structure that gives a sense of belonging and inclusion and engagement through some common things that you're doing with students, like the signature practices, then lead to the relationship building and leads to that rigor, because that's definitely our goal, is to get to that academic rigor. So even in the U.S. Department of Education's recommendations, in a report that's much longer than this, it references that importance of the foundation of providing students with a strong social and emotional foundation so that they can also excel academically. So our U.S. Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, highlighted that, and there's a lot of research embedded within that doc as well, and makes many connections with the prioritization of minimizing the strategies to get a high impact for students, but then also for you. So as we move along today, what we're going to do is I'm just building a little bit of background here. And one of the key visuals that we often refer to, that also you've seen before through those equity department PDs, is the width. We're trying to get to, on this visual, the width. Instead of doing things for kids, to kids, or just not doing much with them, we're trying to get to the width so that there's a restorative aspect to it through high structure, high expectations, and high support. A quick little clarification of some terms as we go along is always important. There's always that alphabet soup in education. And this is a good visual when we think about SEBH. So social emotional behavioral health is really a concept of just comprehensive wellness for all. We all want wellness. We all are constantly striving for that overall socio-emotional behavioral health. One way to do that is through foundational knowledge and skills that promote SEBH. And those SEL learning targets you probably have become familiar with. like self-awareness and relationship skills and social awareness. So through those competencies and learning targets then is what we learn about and implement to have that overall sense of well-being. And within our school structure, of course, we're using that multi-tiered system of support. And that would be the framework that we use to implement PBIS related to SEPH as we're processing the process of identifying the needs of students and matching student need with evidence-based instruction, intervention, progress monitoring, and so forth. So what is MTSS? Again, just a quick little reminder, this is not a full in-depth description by any means, but these are the components. It involves leadership at the building level, district level, in the classroom even, right? Assessment, database, decision-making as a continual part of all aspects of the MTSS process. Strong universal core instruction. That's kind of what we're focused on with these 6 classroom practices, right? And then intervention system, layers of support based upon need and monitoring that over time. And then infrastructure, a couple things that infrastructure includes is professional learning and resources. And so that's our goal today and moving forward is to provide some shared learning and some resources. So as we move along today, one of the resources we will continue to reference is this book. And that is, it might look familiar to you. It's Zaretta Hammond's Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain, again, introduced last year by the Equity Department and Laura Gray. And the foundation of culturally responsive teaching being the importance of being in a relationship with students and having a social emotional connection in order to create a safe space for learning. So you're going to hear a lot about that today. You're even going to see some examples from our own district schools. And I'm going to pass it right along to Allison Freitag.
Good afternoon, everybody. Laura, thanks for getting us started off. It's really great to be with you all today. Though we can't see you, we feel your presence and appreciate your time and attention. So I'm going to walk you through a bit of an analogy here. We're going to use a house analogy. And when I'm reflecting on the quote that Laura just highlighted, talking about the importance of that social emotional connection and building relationships with students, I think about my years as a classroom teacher. I taught secondary social studies and language arts, and part of that time with my students was making social and emotional connections with my students. And I loved it. That was my favorite part of the job, right? So what unique cultures our students bring with them every day, what unique perspectives and experiences, and they share those with us. And we in turn can also bring to the table our unique culture, perspective, and experience and create this wonderful learning community. And so being aware of culture of students and ourselves, that's really the foundation of what we're building upon within the classroom. The framework then that we're looking at here is PBIS. PBIS, as Laura indicated, is our multi-tiered system of support, which supports social, emotional, behavioral health of all of our students district-wide, as well as staff members, right? So we think about what systems and what structures are in place, both school-wide and also set up within our classroom space. Now, PBIS training, when it was initially launched, nearly 20 years ago, 15-ish years ago in the district, focused really, really heavily on the common areas of a school, right? Hallways, lunchroom, et cetera. But we're really excited with this opportunity to really focus in on the walls, right? The strategies and the practices that we're implementing in our classrooms each and every day. And a lot of these strategies and practices that we're talking about don't only have to be implemented and used with classroom teachers, right? Any staff member can utilize a lot of these strategies that Lindsay will walk you through later on today. But thinking about what's happening inside the classroom, how can we spend our time utilizing evidence-based practices that we know lead to positive outcomes? And so what holds the house together? That's the relationships, right? Those are the fasteners or the joiners. And it's really those day-to-day, moment by moment, little interactions, how students are welcomed into the building, how students interact in the hallway, those interactions from any adult. And those help to, again, build connections and build community, and that leads to the ability for students to learn. So we see the house, just about constructed here, and we're thinking about this again as a construction of a house, but also as a construction of our school. So while our PD today will focus primarily on, again, strategies and practices, all of these pieces have to be present for a house or a school to come together. And we hope to incorporate each of these pieces into all of the future sessions that we lead throughout the remainder of the year. So just as we can't build a house without a foundation, we have to have an understanding of culture in order to build those relationships. And we need a framework to support the implementation of these strategies and practices. So when we think about creating safe and supportive classrooms, we're really focused in on the physical and the instructional environment. So what are we doing to set our students up for success? And being really mindful of that helps establish, again, that sense of security and safety and protection for our students, both physical safety as well as emotional safety. So we think about what might we do to prevent or create a safe space where students aren't experiencing some of those microaggressions, right? How can we make sure that in our space, they know that they're safe? And this, of course, leads to feelings of connection and belonging, and really creates the opportunity for students to be engaged with us and with the learning, and leads to higher positive outcomes. So 20 to 25 years of research tells us that when PBIS is implemented with fidelity, we see statistically significant outcomes, right? And that looks like reduction of exclusionary discipline, racial inequity, bullying and exclusion, as well as, going back to that teacher wellness piece, a reduction in teacher burnout and stress. Teachers feel good when they know what is in front of them, right? When they know what systems and structures are there to support them. The research also gives us improved pro-social behavior, emotional regulation, academic achievement, and then overall positive school climate, school safety, and organizational health. We're so excited that we can say all 29 of our district schools are implementing PBIS in some capacity, which is so exciting for every member of our team and leadership throughout the district. And so a special call out to the statistically significant outcomes within high schools. All 4 of our district high schools are implementing PBIS. And you'll notice that in addition to all of the other outcomes, we see reduction of alcohol or drug use, as well as improved attendance and improved school engagement. So those are some really great and exciting outcomes to be able to see. When we think about cultural responsiveness and PBIS, we want to think of them as mutually exclusive, right? These go hand in hand. So, they're not mutually exclusive. So we're thinking about high expectations for all students and all staff. We're thinking about using students' cultures and experiences to really enhance their learning, and providing all students with access to effective instruction, as well as adequate resources and support for that learning. So again, going back to the visual, thinking through high expectations, high help, right? A great resource that we can reference here is the Cultural Responsive Field Guide, which was published and produced by the Center on PBIS recently, and it's recently been revised. And the quote on the screen shows that because contextual fit is a core principle of PBIS, PBIS isn't fully implemented until it is culturally responsive. And so as we learn and grow, we identify what might not be culturally responsive, right? And we can work towards what is. So some of the past practices that were initially trained, we want to transition away from some of those practices, right? Like shaming students or using a behavior chart somewhere within the classroom, putting that out for everybody to see. However, what we might use instead is an opportunity to take a look at our PBIS expectations and conduct an equity audit And many of our buildings, many of our schools throughout the district have done just that within the last few years. They've really taken a look at their language and thought, does this work for all of our students? Does this really support and value all of the students within our learning community? That's really what it's all about. So we'll transition for the remainder of our session together today into really focusing in on those connectors, right? The fasteners and the joiners, which are the relationships that we're building with students. And we're going to give you some specific strategies and practices. To set us up for that, we're going to take a moment to watch a video clip. And as you're watching, be prepared to connect with a colleague briefly after we get done watching the video, and consider maybe what you really connect with in the video, what aha you have. I know for me, after watching this video, which I've watched many times, right, I really love that it just brings me back to my why, right? Why we do what we do each and every day. So take a look, and I'll set you up for some time to connect with a colleague.
You have so much to offer your student. Strong relationships are central to the learning process. What the science of learning and development tells us is that we need to create learning environments which allow for strong long-term relationships for children to become attached to school and to the adults and other children in it. When children have experiences of closeness and consistency and trust, oxytocin is released. Oxytocin has many, many positive effects on the development of the brain. So when we think about a relationship, we're not just talking about being nice to a child. We're talking about a child having an experience of attunement and trust strong enough to release the hormone oxytocin. Good morning, Ariella. How you doing today? The purpose of the morning greeting is to connect with them and to just make sure that I'm seeing them as humans. Like I'm making that relationship with them, making that bond. I prioritize relationship building because getting to know them is the best part of the job.
When I come in the morning, we usually talk about things that are happening in our community.
We're trying to build caring and respect.
The teacher is trying to understand who I am and my values as a person.
When I have a free 45 minutes or an hour, I think to myself, I could sit down and catch up on Grady, or I could go and make connections, whether it's a smile or a joke or a reminder, it validates their presence in the building.
Rock it out in the art room. It starts from so much honesty and transparency with kids. It's really easy to strive to be this like idealized, always ready to go elementary school teacher, and that's not real and that's not human. When people start talking about other things while I'm still giving directions, it feels frustrating for me and I have to take a breath. My students connect most with me when they see that I also struggle and I also have challenges. It takes a lot of vulnerability on my part.
When that student knows that you care about them, when they know that you're a human, let's think about that. Their academic performance in your class is going to be better.
If I'm comfortable around them, then I'm more confident around them, and it's easier to ask questions and things like that.
So when you're looking at this graph, what is it that you think happened?
Some teachers I don't always get along with the best, so then sometimes I'm like, I can't do it, so I'm just not gonna do it. But when I like the teacher, I want to do their work. I'll be like, I can learn this.
You all have done outstanding work.
Emotion and learning are completely connected. If you're in a positive emotional space, if you feel good about yourself, your teacher, that actually opens up the opportunity for more learning. Good to see.
So as we transition into that opportunity for you all to connect with someone who you're sitting close to, whether that's a grade level partner, an individual, maybe a full group. I just like to call out, where the teacher was reflecting on, sometimes we have to feel like we're this idealized person and keep it all together all the time. Sometimes those learning opportunities come from our vulnerability and our genuineness when we interact with students. right? So 2 to 3 minutes, we've got 2 minutes and 30 seconds on the timer. You're going to hear a beeper to start you and a little buzz at the end to bring you all back together. And then we'll transition into some of those strategies. So think about, again, what resonated with you from the video. We're down to our last minute here. Again, you'll hear a sound to signal the end of the reflection time. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Christy.
All right, well, I get to talk a little bit about the research, but nobody gets as excited about this stuff as I do, so we'll keep it brief. There's a wide body of research that talks about the importance and the effectiveness of relationships on students in the classroom. Obviously, one of the major benefits is the huge impact that these relationships have on reducing problem behavior. I think they found about 30% reduction in problem behavior in the classroom. Additionally, relationships have a huge impact on student learning and academic success. Some of you, or most of you, are probably familiar with John Hattie's research on visible learning. And in this, he conducted a meta-analysis and looked at over 800 studies. And out of these studies, he came up with 138 influences. They ranked these influences and came up with an average effect size of 0.4. So all of these things had some kind of impact on student learning. Most of them were positive, and teacher-student relationships came out as with an effect size of 0.72. So that is in the high zone, but also higher than many of these other influences that we probably use all the time and are evidence-based and highly effective. So having those relationships with students, the research really points to a really high impact on students' achievement and learning. It fell right behind feedback. Teacher feedback got an effect size of 0.73. And I think you're all aware of the importance of teacher feedback in student learning. Another important benefit of teacher-student relationships is resiliency. And I think we're all aware of the research around trauma and how important resiliency is in helping students overcome trauma or overall mental health and well-being. And it's easy to assume that the sole responsibility for students building resiliency is within the student. But what we know from the research is that even one relationship with a committed, supportive adult builds that resiliency within students. And this can be a relationship with not just a classroom teacher, but some of you who are staff in the building who can build these relationships outside of the classroom as a school counselor or an SFA or a BI. So we know that these relationships have a high impact on resiliency also. And as was the Zaretta Hammond's book has been brought up a few times here so far today, I just also wanted to mention that she talks a lot about relationships and how important they are in culturally responsive teaching, and that she actually states that they are just as important as the curriculum. And in her book, she goes into the neuroscience behind relationships a little bit. This was also referenced in the video that we just saw. But basically, what happens when a student has a positive relationship with an adult and they experience a simple gesture, might be a high five, might be a smile, something simple, it builds a sense of connection, and it actually releases a dose of oxytocin in the brain. When that happens, the student has feelings of safety and relaxation, which makes them willing to trust teachers and more willing to take risks in the classroom, which are an important part of the learning process. So these relationships actually change the way students' brain is functioning. On the contrary, when students are experiencing stress in the classroom, the opposite happens. The part of the brain responsible for learning actually shuts down. And that's partly because the amygdala, or that emotional center of the brain, becomes activated as a natural human response to protect us from threats. And these threats that students may be experiencing might be more about their emotional safety. For example, a student might be concerned about being teased or bullied or harassed. And anytime a classroom is in a safe space, those things are more likely to happen. Anyway, the good news is that as educators, we have the ability to positively impact brain development. Additionally, you can go on, Allison. Another benefit of these relationships is that they support the overall mental health and well-being of all of our students. When our students are in a safe, supportive environment and actively engaged in the learning, they're not only learning the academic content, but they're also engaged in learning and practicing those social emotional competencies Laura mentioned at the beginning. We don't have a lot of time to dig into those too much today, but we'll be coming back to them in the coming sessions. But those social emotional competencies build students' overall mental health as well. And then one other benefit, if you want to go back, Allison, I have one more thing on that slide I wanted to remember to say, is that as educators, when you have these strong relationships with students, it allows you to recognize those threats that students may be perceiving or may be real in the classroom, and help mitigate them. You can go on. In summary, there's many reasons why relationships are important. We see fewer problem behaviors in the classroom, increased academic success, and increased overall mental health and social skills. So I'm going to turn it over now to Lindsay, and so she can tell us how to build these relationships.
Good afternoon, everybody. As we go through this next section, so the how, we're going to focus on the strategies, those everyday interactions, and that help build those authentic connections with students, allow for going beyond, like the video said, just being nice to kids and actually helping them feel seen and valued. These strategies were reflected in some of the questions that we asked you on that pre-assessment. So thanks again for filling that out. Most of you indicated that you had a knowledge of, a basic understanding of many of these strategies you see listed here, but would like more learning around it. So hopefully as we go through these next slides, through which I'm going to take you through each specific strategy and what that looks like, hopefully you will see, you'll be able to deepen that understanding and feel more comfortable implementing some of these strategies in your classroom space or with students. You'll also notice, because I forgot to mention it, we will skip through a couple of these slides that were elementary specific, but when we send the slides out to you along with the resources, you'll have those available to you in case you're interested in checking those out. So here we have the SEL signature practices, which you've heard us reference a lot already today. And what these are the welcoming inclusion activities, the engaging pedagogy, and the optimistic closure. So what's so important and impactful about these is that they're simple, but they allow for highly engaging, purposeful interactions that, with consistent use, create a classroom that is conducive to growth and learning. And I said you would notice that we have modeled these throughout our PD today. You'll notice it throughout the whole PD series and as we go through today. That welcoming inclusion activity that we did at the beginning, the weather check-in, super simple, right? And really quick and highly impactful. So to highlight how impactful and how important a practice like this is, I want you to think about your own behavior, your own life, and when you're getting ready to start your day or start a class period, move to a new part of your day, your routine, and think about how it feels when you're running late, when you have to go in and get going without any transition time. And we know we often have to do that. And think about what that feels like. I know for me, when I have to do that, I feel stressed, I feel anxious, and I definitely don't show up as my best self. So on the other hand, think about those times when you get a little bit of extra time. You don't have to just dive right into something. Maybe you get to school a little bit early in the morning, or you're able to have a transition from one class to another, and you can take a moment to breathe and center yourself and maybe connect with yourself, connect with others around you, and think about how different that feels. Well, that's what these, not actually just the welcoming inclusion activity, but all of these activities allow. They allow that intentional space for transition and for being ready for whatever's next. So that engaging pedagogy, it creates opportunities for engagement, which we've tried to create throughout and which we'll have more opportunities to do today. And it helps to connect learning to past learning, make connections to the learning that's happening to a student's life and their culture, which we know is really important, and provides opportunities for brain breaks. It just happens in different ways. Those optimistic closures are a really important way to solidify learning, to reflect, and to look forward to what's next. Okay. So greetings are another great way to build relationships, and we have an example here to show you from City High. And what you'll notice is that for this example, it is High Five Friday. We would like to point out that greetings and building relationships through greetings don't just have to happen on Fridays. They can happen any day of the week, or better yet, every day of the week. So I want you to pay attention to all of the different adult contacts that students have when they arrive on campus.
Here we are. Happy Friday. I was so excited. Happy Friday, everybody. Have a great day.
right, so I hope you were able to see that level of positive energy and that even the reluctant students responded positively to the interaction with staff. And as we filmed this grading routine, one teacher mentioned that she felt like the Grinch at the end of the Grinch story when his heart grows 3 sizes. So that's just another great highlight of how these relationship building activities benefit student wellness and belonging, and also adults as we build those relationships. Okay, now we have an example of a class meeting, and this is specific to secondary schools and highlights that optimistic closure SEL signature practice that we talked about. It shows simple ways to connect with students and to have the class build community while reflecting on the learning that is occurring and has occurred.
Appreciation, apology, or aha. The closing circle activity is called the 3 A's: appreciation, apologies, and ahas. So the whole purpose is just to have some space to reflect on our day. All I want you to do is to stand around the room somewhere in a circle while we do our brief shout out. People can either identify an appreciation they have, an apology they have, or an aha moment where it's like a light bulb moment in their head. My aha was that race is not the only part of our identity. So can we get a few people to shout out an appreciation, apology, or aha?
I want to appreciate Jonathan. He helped me kind of figure out where I wanted to go with my personal statement.
I think those types of appreciations or community recognitions can go a long way to build the bonds. That's the whole point, right? Building community.
I apologize for having my headphones in half of the time to everyone.
Thanks a lot for that, Carlos. That means a lot.
Okay, good. Just still an example of simple ways to have a high impact on community and relationships. Another way is those periodic or daily student check-ins. They create a routine in a space that shows students that you care about them as individuals and as humans. It allows for you and other staff who work with students to check in and do that temperature check, see how they are in terms of their emotional well-being and their readiness to learn and engage with the community. So how do you check in with students? What are some ways that you're already doing that? There are many different ways to do this, and these are a couple of examples. One is this Close Gap, which is an online, it's a virtual platform that's free, and they have created, they've expanded their offerings so that they have, it's more applicable for adolescents. So a few buildings are already using Close Gap, and if you are interested in knowing more about it, just let one of us know and we can connect you with a building that's already using it. Another way is to just use a simple Google form. So just ask kids, again, how are you doing? And they're able to check in, both create good information in the moment and over time to continue to see how kids are doing. So that Google form was an example from a team at Liberty. Now we're looking at what's called the 2x10 strategy, which at its core is about consistently building relationships with students. Educators select a student and set a goal to talk to them for 2 minutes a day for 10 consecutive days. And it's really important that these conversations center around who the student is as an individual, what they're interested in, what's going on in their day-to-day life, and should not relate to the student's schoolwork or behavior. It's going an extra step to really get to know them as human beings. This strategy is particularly effective with students who you don't know very well. Maybe they're new to your class, or students who are just having a difficult time connecting with. And the last strategy that we're going to talk about today are the trust generators, which come from Zarita Hammond's book, Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain, that you've heard us reference a lot today, and that hopefully those of you who were in the district last year remember being introduced from the equity team in that PD series. So these trust generators are a way to build trust, but by being more authentic and vulnerable and in sync with students, as you saw mentioned in that video from earlier, that they need to see us as humans too. They need to see that we're authentic in order to trust us and in order to be ready to learn. So one that you were challenged to do last year was that selective vulnerability. And hopefully you did that. And hopefully you're continuing to use that practice. And now we want to challenge you to dig into the rest of these and think about how you can build some of these into your practice with students and how you interact with students and other adults. So these will be shared with you when we share the slide deck out, and you'll have these to look at a little bit more deeply. So now to finish up the strategy section, we really want you to give you an opportunity to engage with your colleagues again. So we ask that you acknowledge a practice that you are already engaging in that builds relationships with students. We know great work is being done every day in the district and that you are likely doing many things to help build relationships. So think about one and acknowledge that and talk to your partner or partners about that. So what are you doing and how do you know it's effective? And then think about one of the strategies that we talked about that you might be willing to try right away, maybe even as early as tomorrow. So talk about that a little bit too, and you'll have some time after the PD to think about an action step. So maybe this is going to be one of them. And we'll do that 2 minutes and 30 seconds again. All right, we're going into our last 10 seconds. So wrap up those conversations. And when you hear the buzzer, just go ahead and rejoin. All right. Well, hopefully you had a chance to reflect again on that great work that you're already doing and to think forward into what next step that you can take to build those relationships. Now I'm going to turn it over to Corrine Frank as she wraps us up for today.
Thanks, Lindsay. So to follow up on your time reflecting about how you engage with students, we really like that this visual points out that putting relationships at the center is really just getting us back to basics. It drills down how we can move through every day with an intentionality towards creating positive, predictable, and safe, both physical and emotionally safe, learning environments. I can't even kind of think through. There's so many interactions that can occur on this cycle all day long, and every interaction matters. The bus, the hallway, the lunchroom, the classroom, the office, etc. Each and every interaction holds the power to reinforce a positive or a negative relationship with a student. Many of the strategies we highlighted today cover all these elements in one. For example, if you started every Monday by greeting your students as they came into your classroom at the door, it would allow for one, connection. It allows for the ability to screen for some social, emotional, mental health needs, the opportunity to provide or offer some additional support. It potentially teaches the greeting skill that maybe we need to practice. And it allows you to monitor over time how students show up to your classroom and to school. And then most importantly, it circles right back up to connection. As teachers and adults in the school building, we gather formal and informal data all day long as we work through this cycle. So we'd be remiss if we didn't talk just a little bit about data before we left today. And we definitely need to know if our efforts to build relationships with students are working. And that is where the data comes in. We have a lot of data points that could provide us feedback that we need to make informed decisions on how we best support students and understand which connection strategies work best for them. Some examples of data you might already be familiar with are included in the slide, right? Starts with those basic teacher observations. We know you're collecting that data every day as you talk with students and support their learning. It moves through visits to different resources in the school, our attendance data, our universal screening data, our behavior events that occur, and then kind of culminates in that culture and climate and those condition for learning surveys that give us comprehensive looks at the data across the whole building. In addition, how do we know who needs more support? We use those data points. And the goal of any SEBH, social emotional behavioral health intervention support, should really be rooted in building stronger relationships between students and adults. The underpinning of any intervention is continuing to foster relationships. Sometimes it can feel like we're doing interventions to kids versus engaging with kids in additional ways. So keeping relationships at the core of the interventions and supports really focuses on the with. So let's finish quickly here, reviewing and revisiting what's going to occur in our future sessions together. Continuing to hear those terms about relationships and the power in relationships will be those fasteners you'll hear referenced throughout our time the next few months. A reminder that we'll spend our time over the rest of the year to review and dig deeper into the 6 PBIS classroom practices that have been identified through research as having the highest impact on student behavior, maximizing instructional time, and on increased academic student achievement. There are absolutely other practices that are effective, but we're going to spend our time and our limited time together focusing on those practices with the biggest impact that are the easiest to implement. And finally, as we wrap up today, we know simply presenting this all to you will not result in a greater implementation of these strategies, although hopefully it's inspiring and allows you to be thinking some different things. So we're going to actually ask that you commit to an action step after each session. In addition, your building principal may have additional direction about a collaboration on a common goal, or perhaps with your grade level or department teams, you want to think about some things you want to do collectively. And if you're not sure where to start in terms of identifying an action step, here are a few examples you might want to consider. I'm thinking back to the first video we watched today and the understanding that emotion and learning really go hand in hand. So I'd urge you to think about one of your student relationships that you know would benefit from intentional relationship building right now. Maybe it's a student you're just struggling to connect with. Perhaps it's a student who you've been in a little bit of conflict with recently, or even a student who's just new to you or you don't know very well. Pick a strategy with that student in mind and give it a try. Following the completion of the webinar, we're going to send a link with a reflection form, which will include each of you being able to identify an action step. One of those things you're going to take to intentionally work on prioritizing the work of building relationships with your students. And I'll have you note the signature practices icon on the bottom of this slide. Optimistic closure, like we talked about earlier, is so important as a way to set up the transition away from our time together. Reflecting on what you learned and taking a moment to look forward as you commit to an action step is how we are honoring the practice of optimistic closure today.
So as we wrap up, as Corinne mentioned, kind of a look ahead. That's part of an optimistic closure is what do we focus on and do today and where are we headed? So you got a glimpse of that at the beginning. Corinne kind of wrapped it up for us as well. Just a few minutes ago, I sent an email out to everyone that's got the slide deck. In that slide deck are links to the things that we've referenced today. And there's also a separate link to a feedback form. And that's where we'd like to know, hey, how did we do today? What did you learn? What would you like to learn more about? And then what is an action step that you're planning to take? So thanks so much for your time and attention. We hope you have a great evening, and we will see you back in this venue in, I don't know, a little bit about a month in January. Take care, everybody.